All right, let's see if and when it loads. Let's see. Are we live? We're live. Yeah. I'm just going to wait for people to join. And we have a little drink. Cheers.
Cheers.
Good evening, says Alex Goldie. Good evening, Alex Goldie. Alice Thorne says dilly dilly. Right. Welcome to my dining room. This is Ed Kozak. He's a good friend of mine, reporter and writer. Helped, in fact, edit my new book, Enoch Was Right, Rivers of Blood, 50 Years On. It's out today, and a lot of you have been, as a lot of you always do, complaining at me that the paperback version wasn't yet available in the UK. That was Amazon's fault. It is now available, so if you want to go to amazon.co.uk, you can find Enoch Was Right on both Kindle and paperback formats. I will endeavour to do an audiobook at some point soon, but it is a very, very long process to do it.
Yep.
I do like the sound of my own voice, Ed, so it shouldn't be that difficult.
You don't say.
No, I did.
Who would have thought?
I did. But the other one is iBooks as well. Now that's more difficult because you have to set it all out in whatever that Apple thing is called, and it's a whole new process. Pages, Apple Pages. It's a whole new process. So it took ages and ages to get this one done, and now I have to do it all again for people who watch on, read on their iPhones and iPads. But while people are joining, we just thought we'd have a quick drink. Cheers. It's 50 years today, the anniversary of the Rivers of Blood speech, or as he called it, the Birmingham speech. So that's a toast to Mr. Powell.
To Enoch.
So the way I thought we'd do this was, I can obviously just talk at you guys for hours, as I sometimes do, but I thought better to get Ed in, who knows his way around the territory, to ask questions on your behalf. We are looking at the comments section, so I keep looking down here, looking at the comments section, so you can throw in your comments, questions. I hope we can keep it on topic. I know some of you are interested in where I get my scarves and so forth, but if we can keep it on topic for today, that would be wonderful. We shan't keep you very long at all. Before we really start, I have just a couple of requests in the same vein. Two of them. Number one, hit the share button on this video, bring more people to it. Number two, if you can at the same time without losing the stream, please tweet it out, retweet me. I just tweeted about going live on Facebook, so that would be very nice. And with that, I pass you over to Mr. Edmund Kozak.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll just start with the basics. For anyone watching who doesn't know, who was Mr. Enoch Powell and why is he important?
For those that don't know, Enoch Powell was the King of England in 1100. Enoch Powell was a British Member of Parliament in the 50s and 60s and 70s. He was the youngest ever Brigadier General in the British Army during the Second World War, where he fought and contributed to many campaigns. One thing people don't know about him, unless you've read loads and loads of Enoch in your life and loads of biographies on Enoch in your life, which unfortunately most people haven't, one of the things that people don't realise is just how crucial he was in the Second World War. His intelligence reports, his intelligence briefings really, fundamentally, the El Alamein campaign could not have been won without him. And the war would have gone a very different way, and I dare say in a very worse way, were it not for him. He was deployed in India for several years. He then came back to the United Kingdom. In fact, interestingly, before the war, he was the second youngest professor in history. At the age of 25, he became a professor at the University of Sydney, teaching classics, teaching Herodotus. A really extraordinary person. And by the end of his life, I think he spoke 17 languages fluently, which is quite extraordinary. But as I say, he was a member of Parliament, and he really came to his own. He really shot to fame in 50 years ago today, in a speech he gave in Birmingham in 1968, which became known as the Rivers of Blood speech, where he was warning about the impact of mass migration, warning about the lack of integration, the ghettoization, although he didn't like to call it ghettoization, that would inevitably take place if you have so many people coming into a country at a time. And my contention in this book was that he was bang on with his even the most dire of predictions that he made in that speech. But the speech got very, very famous. I'll let you ask the questions as to what and why.
Okay, so let's move right along. This speech is what he is most known for today, despite the fact that, as you say, he was a polymath, a Renaissance man in the truest sense of those terms, yet he is known pretty much only for this one speech. What was the speech, and why are we still talking about it 50 years ago? 50 years on.
Well, he would have begged to differ on the point that he was only known for that speech, but I will give it to you that in 2018 he's probably only known for that speech. I mean, don't forget, he was also one of the very first Eurosceptics at a time when most of the Conservative Party was saying, yeah, the European community, what a great idea, we should go along with it, we should be in there. He was the one who stood up time and time again and said, no, this is a superstate. And you cannot have a nation as long as there is a superstate if and when you give power over to them. But the speech itself, so interestingly, he had, just a couple of months earlier, given a very similar speech in Walsall, which is known to Enocophiles as the Walsall speech. And the Walsall speech was effectively the same, but what it didn't do is it didn't quote his own constituents, which happens to be one of the most contentious parts of the Birmingham speech, and B, he didn't use the phrase, like the Roman, I see the river Tiber foaming with much blood. He actually delivered that in Birmingham in Latin, in the original Latin, which I can't do, and then translated it for the audience. That is a nuance that is often lost amongst the media, the establishment media who cover Enoch. And the reason I think it's intentionally lost is because it gives a wider context to what he was saying. If anybody knows that Latin phrase, if anybody knows where it comes from Virgil's Aeneid. And if you read, it's chapter 6, book 6 of the Aeneid. If you read the whole thing through, and I've read, over the course of researching this book, 20 different translations and all sorts of variations on it, you find out that he wasn't saying he sees the river Tiber foaming with much blood because immigration necessarily brings blood along with it. What he was saying was that for both the indigenous population and the immigrant population, life tends to get harder when you introduce at a mass level a group of people at one time into a civilization, into a society, and just expect things to go swimmingly well. And that was Sybil's prophecy to Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid. And that was the biggest problem, that was the biggest flaw that he had, was he expected and thought and hoped, I guess, that everyone was like him. A classicist, as you say, a Renaissance man, somebody who understood history and was were well read, and of course that the British political establishment at the time, even let alone now, was certainly not.
Okay, so I guess just take a half step back. What was going on in Britain in 1968 that prompted Powell to give this speech, and are there parallels to Britain in 2018?
Oh God, parallels. I mean, it was a microcosm of what's going on today. Look, what was going on? I mean, it really started in the 40s when the Canadians decided that they were going to unilaterally sort of just completely do away with the idea of subjecthood, British subjecthood. The Canadians, as much as the Commonwealth were at the time before that, British subjects of the British Empire, and proud of it, and so they should have been. But it was actually, was it Trudeau's father? It may have been Trudeau's father or one of his compatriots who decided that this wasn't a good idea, introducing a citizenship bill, and forced the British political establishment in a move that was created to try and keep the Commonwealth together, to change their way of doing things from subjecthood to citizenship too. So in 1948 you had the Citizenship Act, the Nationality Act, which effectively meant that all these people around the world could immediately come to Britain and get citizenship, and the rights of citizenship as they were now stated by the Nationality Act. Well, this was true before the Nationality Act, in that any British subject had the right to domicile in the United Kingdom. But what the Citizenship Act did is it basically publicised the fact. And in a post-war world, that became incredibly, as transportation became much easier and cheaper, that became very attractive to people. What they didn't do is say, yes, but we don't tend to allow people to immigrate and settle for long periods of time, or if you do come, we want you to either have a job or some prospects or anything like that. None of it. And this was really a failure of the British political establishment. I go into some detail on this in the early parts of the book because I think it's so important to recognise the context upon which Powell was operating. This wasn't like there had been centuries of mass migration into Britain and then one day some bloke stands up and goes, no, we don't want this anymore. He was the person begging for normality. He was the person begging for a return to how the country had operated for the last several hundred years. The largest immigrant wave before post-Windrush and certainly before the East African immigrant wave into the United Kingdom was the Huguenots, the French Huguenots, who were obviously fleeing persecution from France, and they numbered in their total 50,000 over 100 years.
Puts it in perspective.
Just a bit.
So then back to the speech. You mentioned the two most controversial parts were the Enid quote, which we've been over, and then the fact that he quoted one of his constituents. What did his constituent have to say, and why was that so controversial?
So he quoted from a letter, and he also quoted one of his constituents. Now his constituent, this chap, basically said to him that I am fearful that my kids growing up in a country where there is ghettoization occurring, where crime rates are getting higher, where there is a struggle for school places, etc., etc. And this chap said to him, I also fear, and this was around the time that the Race Relations Act was coming into force, said to him, I fear that in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man. And of course, that was contentious as a thing to say. But Powell said in the closing of his speech, people will ask how I could say such things, to which I respond, I have no right to not say them. These are his constituents telling him their concerns, and Wolverhampton, where he was the Member of Parliament, was a place where this was happening, one of the very few places in the United Kingdom where this was happening on a scale that you just couldn't believe. So he quoted that chap, who he said worked for one of the nationalised public services, and then he quoted this from this letter about this old lady who had excreta, as he put it, pushed through her door, whose whole neighbourhood had changed. She found herself to be the only white lady left living in her neighbourhood, and he said she's fearful to go out. Quoting from the letter, she said she's fearful to go out. These kids, coloured immigrant kids, as the phrase was at the time, would chase her down the street, not knowing a word of English, but the one word they did know and that they pointed at her was racialist. And this, of course, as he called it, the chorus of execration was brought upon him by the political establishment simply for saying something that he had been told as a matter of fact, as an experience of either one of his constituents or one of his constituents that passed him that letter. There is some, well, I'll turn it on its head. There is no evidence that that woman or that letter existed. It goes back and forth. Some people say, oh, she absolutely did, and his widow, Pam Powell, said she absolutely did. He used to carry the letter around with him in his pocket, and so on and so forth. But no evidence was ever presented. Some local journalists scoured the neighbourhood looking for this woman, couldn't find her, so on and so forth. He maintains that he verified the letter, he verified the source of the letter, and he was quite happy. And I go into this in the book. There is no reason to believe that somebody like Enoch Powell would ever have lied about anything like this. There were plenty of examples from across the United Kingdom of stuff like this going on at the time, and certainly into the future. And we know now with places like Dewsbury in West Yorkshire just how these neighbourhoods have progressed. So I find no reason to disbelieve him on the back of this. But a lot of people say, including Nigel Farage, who's I've interviewed at length in this book because he knew Enoch, he had met him several times, he had driven him to a by-election in 1993. Some people say that because of the way he presented this speech, as opposed to how he did it in Walsall, that he actually set back the immigration debate, set back the immigration argument, because it fundamentally allowed the political establishment to find a fall guy, a foil for the opposition to mass migration. And I think that's the case now, by the way. What we've seen over the last couple of weeks, when you look at the BBC's coverage, when you look at Sky News' coverage today, all of this stuff that's been going on, all they're interested in doing is finding a fall guy to say, racist, we shouldn't listen to the views of anybody who believes anything like what Powell said. Despite Powell going on the record multiple times saying, I set my face like flint against discrimination against anybody because of his background or skin colour, they were not going to have it. And so there is this perennial argument, this argument will be had for the next couple of 100 years, I'm sure, by nerds like me, as to whether or not he helped the debate or hindered the debate. My book doesn't really, apart from what Nigel says on it, doesn't really touch on whether he helped or hindered the debate. I might do that another time. But the conclusion of the book is when you take everything he said in order of which he said it, and you dissect it, and you look at the data, the statistics, the figures, the anecdotal evidence, all of it proves, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Enoch was right.
Okay, so then let's go back to that. Enoch was right. Is that why the reaction was so hysterical to that speech? Was it just something that no one in the establishment wanted to face, or had we not gotten there yet? Were there people out there who legitimately thought, "Oh wow, what a horrible racist"?
Oh, I'm sure there were people who thought, oh wow, what a horrible racist, because these were people, again, just like the same people who say it now, and say it to me now, let alone about him, who fundamentally don't understand normality pre-1948. They're people who also don't understand the difference between, as he often said, it is a question of numbers. He would say that over and over again. And I think most people out there, and you tell me, you guys, in the comments, because I am checking these, I think most people are okay with immigration in a normal sense. Immigration as most other sovereign nation states in the world have it. In the way that Japan has it, in the way that Argentina has it, in the way that China has it, in the way that Russia has it, in the way that the Saudis have it, and the Indians have it, and every other nation in the world. Net inward migration as a proportion, Britain would have a couple of tens of thousands coming in every year. Well, after Windrush, that number went up and up and up, and then a little dip in the 1980s, and then a huge spike from 2004 onwards after we entered the European treaty on open borders. And we now have net migration into the United Kingdom at about 300,000 a year. That's the size of a major city coming into the United Kingdom every year, and gross at 600,000. That's the best part of 1 million people coming into an island nation with finite resources, finite space. And people can see it, you guys can see it in your everyday lives, how classroom sizes are increasing, how it's harder to get hospital beds. And people, we'll just build more. Where are you going to build them? And this was one of the things that made him so prophetic, made Enoch such an incredible rune reader. because he wasn't just thinking about his past, and he wasn't just thinking about himself. He had 2 daughters. He knew the world that they were going to grow up in, and he wanted to make sure that world was not the world it is today. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No. Still, it's great.
Just to do a reset here quickly, we're really grateful for you guys all joining us. I'm Raheem Kassam. This is Ed Kozak. We're talking about my new book, Enoch Was Right. Rivers of Blood, 50 years on. I've worked on this for a couple of months now, to say the least. Years of study of the man. You wouldn't believe in my office over there. I've got stacks and stacks of books about him. If you hit the share button on this, and if you can tweet about it as well, we're going to stay live with you for a little bit. We're reading your comments. I'm reading your comments in the comments section here. Going to read out some of the best ones. So keep commenting. The book's out now. It's on Amazon. It's available on Kindle in the US, Kindle in the UK, paperback in the US, paperback in the UK. The paperback UK version just went up, so if you're one of those people that tried to get it earlier and went, bloody hell, they're only providing this on Kindle and I don't have a Kindle, I feel for you. I also don't like reading on a Kindle. The paperback version is up now. Jeff Bezos and his Amazon team just took a little bit longer to get to it than I would have liked. So with that, I'm going to go back. Oh, somebody's saying we've disappeared and no sound. Let's see if anybody else says that, because I can still see the comments flowing in. Can you guys hear us? We'll just wait and see if people reply that they can hear us. Ed, in the meantime, how are you enjoying the whiskey?
Oh, it's lovely. It's lovely. I've been dieting, so it's been a while since I've had whiskey. It's good.
Ed and I are on a new diet. Where we're not eating any sugar or carbs. We're going to see how that works out for us. All right, everybody's saying that the audio is fine, so we'll continue on. Ed, back to you.
Okay, so the people watching who aren't that familiar with the story might be a little confused at this point, because so far it doesn't really sound like Mr. Powell said anything too outrageous. Yet he overnight became this kind of bogeyman that the left and the, to an extent, Tory establishment was able to use to kind of scare people about this racialist right boogeyman that didn't really exist. So if the speech wasn't that bad, why was the reaction so intense?
Well, first, let me say this. The speech, I don't think, was particularly violent or aggressive, but then again, people know my form when I go on television, so maybe don't take my word for it. I put it this way. It wasn't particularly bad or aggressive, but it was something that really hadn't been said by a person of his stature at that point. Don't forget, he was a member of the Shadow Cabinet at this point. He had been health minister. This was a very, very senior person as far as the British political establishment goes. And it's interesting because he was just not one of them. He was a grammar school boy. He was not the sort of type to go to the Carlton Club and schmooze people all night. He'd much rather either get back to his desk and continue on with his studies, as he really loved to do, or talk to ordinary people. And so for them, it sounds like somebody else actually that we know who I wish were here to talk about this now. He's very similar to Nigel Farage in that regard. So firstly, it was a shock to the system in that regard. Secondly, you have to understand that Ted Heath, as leader of the Conservative Party at the time, was not doing a particularly good job. He was not particularly impressive to people. He was very wobbly on the European question already, if not totally sold on the idea that Britain needed to give up its sovereignty. And Enoch Powell had, as he used to say, left his calling card at a Conservative Party leadership election prior to this, where he actually showed that one day he will take Mr. Heath's job. So Mr. Heath, in the immediate aftermath of this speech, and I'm talking immediate aftermath, within a space of hours, had decided that he was sacking Powell from the Shadow Cabinet. Now, for me, I think that was just straight up political opportunism. He saw a way to kill his most potent enemy off, and sure enough, won the next election because so many people were turned on to the Conservative Party by what Enoch had said. The dock workers, old Labour voters who would have never gotten into bed with Ted Heath, were suddenly thinking of voting Conservative because they saw something in Powell and they wanted that. And even though Powell had been sacked, they went on at the next election to vote for the Conservative Party and deliver the Conservative Party an unexpected victory. Well, by 1974 that had changed because Enoch went around the country in the second election in 1974 telling people to vote Labour because Labour were offering a referendum on the European Community question. And there was an incident, I think it was, I forget where it was now, it's in the book. He was at a public event and it was in Yorkshire and he started to speak, telling people to vote Labour and that he was no longer happy to count himself as a member of the Conservative Party, and somebody screamed, "Judas!" And without second thought, Powell said, "Judas was paid! I am making a sacrifice!" It's one of the most extraordinary moments. I mean, off the cuff, just like that, and it was absolutely correct. Here was a man, if he had just stayed silent and continued inside the Conservative Party doing what he was doing, there is no doubt that he would have been Prime Minister. But he made a sacrifice to let the country know that the status quo was not right, and the status quo ante was far better, far more in the country's interest. Effectively, he paid one of the most ultimate political sacrifices. He was consigned to, the fringes for the rest of his near the fringes for the rest of his career. He still did at some points pop up and make interventions, but demonized so readily by the political establishment, by the media classes, by Heath. I mean, but Thatcher, who loved and adored the man, and has said so very many times. Even she couldn't find enough common ground with him when she was in government to bring him back into the Conservative Party, and she would have benefited greatly from him in government.
So then, why does Powell's legacy scare the British establishment so much? Because he still has that reputation. You are one of the few people who have made any attempt to kind of take another look at that reputation. I can remember when I was very young and first kind of showing an interest in politics, Powell was a name you would generally hear with Mosley and not with Thatcher.
Right.
So why hasn't anything changed, and why is there still this bizarre historical stigma around the man?
It's a great question. Well, firstly, when you look at the modern day historians, look apart from people like Roger Scruton and Douglas Murray, who do get it. But you look at the people that are quoted on television every day. I mean, Sky News had this chap from the Runnymede Trust on today who had no idea what he was talking about. Literally fake news upon fake news talking points over and over and over. And I intend to do a takedown of his interview tomorrow in video form. But the British Future Organisation, this Soros-funded group, and all of these other groups. All right, fine. There is an element of intentional disingenuousness of them, but they are also stupid people. They are also really not educated people. And I don't mean go to Oxford or Cambridge educated. I mean autodidacts like myself. I went to a shitty state school. I went to a shitty university. Right, but I bothered to pick up books. I bothered to watch the interviews. I bothered to listen, analyse, go into some detail on this stuff. The Sundar Katwalas of the world who run this British Future thing, they're actually not intelligent people. Which is why, by the way, I offer to debate them all the time. All of these people: Nick Lowles from Hope Not Hate, Sundar Katwala, Alistair Campbell, Mark Kelly from the New European. They'll write me an email back and say, "Oh, I'm sure we can find some time in the future. That sounds interesting." They never ever bother to actually firm up a debate, to sit down and do these things. You guys have seen what happens when Sky News puts me up against these people. I mean, it's a bloodbath. And I'm sorry to say, and I really don't like to be unnecessarily mean about people, but I do like to be necessarily mean about people. They are necessarily stupid. So that's one element that answers your question as to why We haven't really seen a proper investigation and a proper analysis about Powell and the speech. The other part of it is that you have to have a foil. You know, as far as the liberal, let's take a step back. Look, state-sponsored multiculturalism, liberalism, all of these things that go hand in hand, they are in crisis, like super crisis mode right now. And I don't just mean because of 2016. I mean, before 2016, it was happening in 2012, 2013, 2014. It was happening immediately after the 2004 treaty obligations that we took on in terms of European community and its open borders. They could see what was going on. They could see that in towns and cities, or not just, by the way, if there are any Americans in here, not just across the United Kingdom, but all across the Western world, mass migration was having a net neutral impact in terms of GDP and economy, and a net negative impact in terms of culture, in terms of identity, in terms of all of these things that real people care about, what their roads look like, how their neighbourhood feels, you know, who they're living amongst, how those people behave, whether they're integrated or not, what languages people are speaking. They could see that. The smart ones amongst them, and there are some, could see that. And if you accept the truth, which is that Enoch's premonitions on this, his prophecies on this, were right, then the whole liberal establishment comes crashing down. And I realise how, what a statement I'm making when I say that. If you're an American and you're in here right now, you absolutely have to study Enoch Powell, because I think he is now used as one of the legs on the stool that keeps the neoliberal, state-sponsored multicultural establishment standing. The fake legacy they've created for him. And I hope those two things together answers your question. Somebody said I'm waffling and I clearly need to have some more carbs. This is, by the way, if I'm waffling, it's not because of this. This is I have had about 6 sips and this is my first. But you're right, I do need carbs. Honestly, I'll tell you why I might be waffling. Genuinely, there is a nervousness about me having published this book, and it shouldn't be that way. But the establishment has made it feel like this is a taboo subject. This is off the table. We're not allowed to talk about it. So I am actually worried. I'm worried if anybody's going to buy it. I'm worried if anybody's going to read it. I'm worried about if anybody's going to it's going to have any impact. And I'm worried. It's fair to say that I'm pretty outcast by the political elite already. But I'm worried that this is sort of the last nail in the coffin as far as they're concerned with ever having me back on Sky or BBC or whatever. Am I making Enoch's same mistake? Do you know what I mean? Am I going too far in doing this to the point where actually I'm cutting myself out of the solution side of it because I'm so interested in highlighting the problem? So that's why I'm waffling.
So that answers your question, if you were wondering why.
Ed Lewis
is waffling.
Ed Lewis Carr says, "Are you guys a couple?" Well, we're a couple of reprobates, but that's about all we're a couple of.
So, here's an interesting point. Powell's speech at the time, he was making that speech largely with West Indian immigrants in mind. That's immigrants from the Caribbean, for the Americans watching this. The cultural differences that he was recognizing sort of pale in comparison to the cultural differences we're dealing with now in terms of the immigrant groups that we have coming into the West. What do you think Powell would have made of the situation now?
I can't imagine. I mean, I cannot imagine how we would have... What's really fascinating about this, and again, I go into this in one of the conclusions in the book, is that, you still have a major problem with integration in some of the black communities. Not necessarily a problem with integration, but a problem with ghettoisation. You're seeing that playing out in London at the moment because of the high levels of crime, knife crime, gun crime, youth homicide rates. All of that is mostly happening within one community. And we can get onto why that is in a moment. I'm not scared of talking about that. Because even David Lammy, by the way, he'll try and pretend it's about police officer numbers. He was in 2010 telling the Runnymede Trust that a lot of the problems in the black community are because of single parent households. And I think there's a significant amount of truth in that. but Enoch also recognised that there was a significant difference between, say, the West Indian immigrant population, the Pakistani immigrant population, and something like the Indian immigrant population. I mean, he was a massive Indiophile, right? And you know, full disclosure, I might be spinning you a yarn because my parents are of Indian heritage, but go and look up what he said about Indians. He this amazing interview with Michael Cockrell that he gave for the BBC, where he said the Indians and the British dreamt a dream together, and still when an Englishman and an Indian meet, they say, let us go over there in that corner and dream our dream together. And when you look at integration in the United Kingdom today, when you look at university rates, when you look at graduation, when you look at STEM subjects, higher education, employment rates, salary, all of these things, there is only one group that either competes with or outcompetes white Britons, Indians. Isn't that interesting?
That's very interesting.
Isn't that interesting that Powell identified that all the way back then? It's because he spent time in India. He saw the soul of the Indian, and he knew, and the soul of the Indian in that regard was created effectively by the English. You know, they instilled in the Indians a lot. I mean, look, going back thousands of years, the Indians have always been wonderful in terms. I mean, they gave us the numerals we use today. But the Indian as we know him today would not be the Indian as we know him today without the English. And he saw what had happened there, and he saw that it worked. And that's why, by the way, I am not, and I never apologise for British colonialisation in India. I think it was a net positive for the country, and I think you look across the world now at some of the former. I mean, you know, the Kenyan Foreign Ministry today begging Boris Johnson for money to help their education system. Well, you know, you had your chances. You all had your chances once upon a time. You said, no, we want independence. Well, you got your independence. Stop asking for our money. And no, I'm sorry. I know what that sounds like. You had the opportunity to be part of this empire. You had the opportunity to bathe in the wealth that was being created by Britain. And you rejected it. Don't come begging for money now. Sorry. I know now this is going to end up on Sky tomorrow. Front page of the Times.
Hey, you're not wrong. So,
Well, thank you.
Powell identified the problem. Did he have any solutions?
It is a question of numbers. It was over and over again. His solution was to say that, you know, if you bring it down, if you bring the numbers down, then necessarily you will get a better rate of integration. Interestingly, the British Future Report, and if you're just joining us, I mentioned this British Future organisation, this Soros-funded group earlier, they make the allegation that Powell was wrong, Enoch was wrong, because there is great interracial marriage happening now in the United Kingdom, because Meghan is marrying Harry, and therefore Powell was wrong. Interestingly, Powell had said on a number of occasions that intermarriage was one of the ways that integration would occur. The whole legacy is being rewritten. It effectively does come down to numbers. There was this policy called bussing out, I believe in the 60s, where there were so many immigrant background children in certain areas that they were dominating classrooms, the English language wasn't being spoken, so on and so forth. So what they began to do is put them on buses in the morning and take them to schools outside the district in which they were living, outside the effective ghettos, or what were to become ghettos, where they were living, to force integration. Of course, nowadays, you know, bussing out would be, you know, just you imagine the excoriation in the House of Commons chamber if Theresa May stood up. Not that Theresa May would ever stand up there and say this, but imagine if Theresa May said, "Well, actually, we do have a problem with integration going on in vast many places in our country, and therefore we're going to make sure that children integrate by having smaller non-English speaking ethnic minority background people in a greater number of schools." Well, there would just be, you know, the great chorus of execration. But back to your question about, you know, what Powell would think of, and I know what you're getting at. Let's talk about it frankly. Muslim immigration into the West has been an absolute disaster. On the whole, you get aberrations. Mostly, you'll find, by the way, that those aberrations tend to be people who have left the faith, or you know, while they may not say they have left the faith, they act as if they have left the faith. I'm not going to say any names, but there are people out there that we know do not exactly live their lives as the Prophet Muhammad did, and still profess to be publicly profess to be Muslims. No, this is a major. I mean, here's the thing: if they had listened to Powell back then, we wouldn't have had this problem now, because we would have realised it couldn't and wouldn't work the way it does. It was because they ignored Powell and because what they did to Powell that we have this mass Muslim immigration into the West right now. And you want to talk about the whip hand, by the way. You know, that quote from his constituent, that the black man would have the whip hand over the white man. Well, you can see that in a lot of places, you know, with the Roads Must Fall campaign. You can see it in the positive discrimination against white people at the BBC and ITV and all these places. But I mean, look at the whip hand that Muslim organisations have over native Britons. Not even native Britons, people like me, frankly. They have the whip hand over people like me, using phrases like Islamophobia and things like this. I mean, really, this tiny percentage of the population, relatively speaking, I mean, 3 million Muslims in the United Kingdom today, have an extraordinary amount of influence over the rest of us and the way that our lives are led. You know, halal Easter eggs, and, you know, all this nonsense that we see going on at the moment, catering to such a tiny but violent, rhetorically violent, and physically violent community. I mean, that is the whip hand. That is the real whip hand. This will be on the front page of the Times tomorrow.
Yeah. So then, recently, I don't remember if it was last week or early this week, a British politician got himself into trouble.
Oh, I just want to say, sorry, I have to butt in here because Raymond has just joined as a patron on Patreon live right now. For those of you that don't, take the opportunity. For those of you that don't know, so I didn't have a publisher for this book. It cost a lot of money, my own money. Well, thankfully, because of you guys, a lot of your money to put this book together. Lots of source materials that I had to buy. I mean, I think I spent $1,000 on source materials in total, because all of these books are out of print now. And you know, you can get them on eBay, but they're about £100 each and whatever. The picture for the front book cover and all this stuff, the promotion that will go on the back of it. So to my Patreons, again, you go to patreon.com/Raheem Kassam. The patrons that I have are actually listed in the acknowledgements section of this book, and I intend to do that with all the things that I create, all the books that I create, everything that I do. Shout out to you guys. They're all listed, and I thank you very, very much. If you want to, you can be £1 or $1 a month. That's absolutely fine. Every single penny helps, because no publisher would touch anything like this, by the way. And the things that I'm talking about, you know what happened to this Meacham character, the Count Dankula chap, you know, with his Nazi pug dog. You know what's happening to Tommy Robinson. You know they are trying to shut us down. And there will come a time, and I suspect that time is very soon, where somebody like me doesn't even have a basic income, but wants to keep doing the work I'm doing. And it's you guys that I'm going to come begging to say, you know, help. You know, like Powell said, you know, I often get called a Judas by Muslims and by South Asians. And I say, no. Judas was paid. I'm making a sacrifice. You know, I could have easily, if I wanted a cushy lifestyle, gone and worked for the United Nations or for a Soros group, or just not gone into politics at all, done something else. This is a real sacrifice. The number of death threats I get week upon week, you know, you wouldn't believe. Do the police want to do anything about it? Absolutely not. So anyway, thank you to my patrons, and thank you to Raymond for just signing up. He's signed up, I think, for $5 a month. Every little helps. Thank you so much. You were saying it.
Just recently, there was a bit of a mess in the British press after a politician referenced Enoch Powell. I think it was a politician. It could have been a DJ or something.
I don't know this one.
And it was only last week. Maybe it was Monday.
Okay.
Big uproar. The headline was basically, "Can you believe this person spoke of Enoch Powell favorably?" Are we... As long as Powell has that reputation, what does that say about our ability to have difficult conversations about difficult topics?
I don't think we have any difficult... I mean, look at the way that I have caveated everything just talking to you. You know, we're in my house. We're in the United States of America, where you have a First Amendment that is defended by the Second, by the way, for all of you guys that don't like the idea of self-harming. But the Second protects the First, and we have the First. and we're on Facebook, which is at least notionally an open forum, although we know what happens if you get too
open,
too true on Facebook and Twitter and all those things. I don't think we are having difficult conversations. I think if you and I were having a difficult conversation right now, and I sincerely hope we don't move on to this territory, but I think if you and I were having a difficult conversation right now, we'd be talking a lot more about demographics. We'd be talking a lot more about detail. And everyone out there is aware of a lot of these details, and nobody wants to say it, nobody wants to, because we can't. I mean, they string you up nowadays for talking about some of these things. You just cannot get into that. So I think there are issues in our I was going to say society. I actually think there's issues in our civilization that go way back, and I know you agree with me on this, Ed, that go way further back than the 1900s or the 1800s or the 1700s. They go way back, to the first and the earliest Enlightenment thinkers, who basically set in train this liberal fascism that we have now. And that's why tomorrow morning I could wake up and this Facebook page just be taken off air. Here's the thing about what Enoch couldn't understand about the mass migration and about the debate that wasn't allowed on the back of it. Britain had traditions going back hundreds of years of being able to say what you want, no matter whom it offended and how it offended them, didn't matter. Just didn't matter. Say what you like. If your ideas are stupid, they'll fall to the bottom, etc., etc. And in came the liberals, in came the left, and said, actually, the right's ideas are too on the nose, and we have to suppress them. And now you're seeing it at Speaker's Corner. Now you're seeing it, and on May the 6th, I will be back in the United Kingdom, and we will be marching with Tommy Robinson and a whole host of others, people, personalities, on the right. Not just on the right, by the way, on the left as well. I'm sorry, I messed that one up. We were going to be marching for free speech, and I hope you can all join us. It's so important, because I want to get back to a point where I can tell you to fuck yourself and you can't run to the police. Fuck yourself.
Hold on, I'm going to file a police report. So, I guess back to the subject of your book.
Yeah.
Enoch, his speech, being right.
Yeah, go ahead. In 10 minutes, we're going to move on to looking at the comments and remarking on some of the things you guys are saying. So in about 8 minutes, start feeding questions, comments in here, and we're just going to keep going through all of that.
So why write the book now, and where do we go from here?
Well, I've always liked trouble. No, I mean, I'm not kidding. I have always liked to stir up trouble, and I've always, for as long as I can remember being politically aware, I've always wondered about, people like Powell, people like Farage, all the things that we're not allowed to say anymore. And I just thought, it's about time. And you know what? I'll say this. I feel incredibly grateful to Western civilization, even I'm afraid, post-Enlightenment Western civilization. But I feel incredibly grateful on behalf of myself, on behalf of my parents, on behalf of my family, for being raised in the United Kingdom, for having the benefits of it all. And I suppose, in a way, this is my way of giving back. Is to say that not everybody that is an immigrant or of immigrant background wants to fundamentally change the nature of your civilization or your nations. Some of us, and we do exist, and I've met many, love it and want to be a part of it and want to contribute to it and want to protect it. That's by the way what British subjecthood was really predicated upon. It was the idea of deference. Deference to the sovereign, deference to the monarch, deference to the nation, until 1948, where they basically changed it to being a legalistic relationship between state and citizen. I have deference. There are many people with brown skin, with black skin, from all parts of the world that have that deference. There aren't, unfortunately, so many. There are more nowadays. There aren't so many who are willing to take their life into their own hands to just shout about it from the rooftops. And I just think if I don't, then who will? So multiple reasons I wrote this. I also realised, look, it's the 50th anniversary today. The media is going to be packed to the gunnels with anti-Powell stuff, and somebody's got to come along and go, stop. This is not the truth. Stop lying to people. In fact, I wonder if I can bring it up here very quickly. Simon Heffer, who wrote the best biography, my book is not a biography, who wrote the best biography on Enoch Powell. It's not on here, unfortunately. He wrote to me today, he emailed me today, and I haven't had any contact with him throughout writing this book, apart from reading his book. He, off his own back, wrote to me and said, Raheem, you're absolutely right about, and I'm sorry if I'm breaking your confidence, Simon, by saying this, but he said, you're absolutely right about Enoch. He was no more a racist than I was a catwalk model. And if you've seen Simon Heffer, he is no catwalk model. And he said, Raheem, you've done a great service to Enoch by putting this out there, and thank you for that. And honestly, the pleasure's all mine.
Yeah. I guess my last question then, because I think we've covered the meat of your book, and I think if anyone has any further questions about the details of the speech, they should go and buy your book, and they can read the speech in it.
Kozak says buy it.
Yeah, you heard it here, folks.
So,
Is there other things people should know about Powell? Because you mentioned his illustrious military career, the fact that he was a classicist, and note to classicists out there, don't assume your audience knows what you're talking about. Is there anything else about him viewers should know? Because he in very strange ways, he was kind of the first modern Tory.
Well, what are you getting at?
Well, I'm getting at it's an odd choice of character to paint as a far right boogeyman, a man who absolutely adored people from the Indian subcontinent, was pro-gay marriage, and was a doctrinaire free marketeer.
And I think possibly gay himself in early life. There is some going back and forth on this. The evidence doesn't sort of come down in its, in any conclusive way either way, but there was certainly some stuff to suggest that he preferred the company of young men as a young man. And I'm not sure if that went to the romantic. It certainly felt in a lot of his work that it lent towards the romantic. But you're right. I mean, modern Tory he was. He was a monetarist before, he was Thatcher before Thatcher. He was a free marketeer. He was a liberal on economics, effectively. You had David Cameron and Nicholas Soames in the early 2000s, effectively giving Powellite speeches in the House of Commons chamber. Everybody knows that this man. Look, everybody who knows, right? The stupid people will never know, but everybody who knows. Tony Blair knows, David Cameron knows, all the Tory party know that this man was not a monster. He was not a racist. He was certainly not a fascist. This is one of the things that they now write about him. They say he had a fascist turn. The man fought fascists in his military career. He was not a fascist, It is interesting, isn't it, how we forget the details of his life. I mean, go back and look through his collected poems. I think you can get it on Amazon, but not before you get my book. Go back and look through his collected poems. I mean, here was somebody who was, it's weird. He was a sort of old-fashioned Germanic romantic, but who had this sort of cold exterior, but the most romantic heart you could ever imagine. There's a poem. He wasn't very good at putting the romantic thoughts down in print, but there's this poem that he wrote, and it says something like this. It says, I did not speak, but when I saw you move your right leg over your left and fold your hands across your lap, I felt the white hot lava flowing up the old volcano shaft. I mean, erotic, not romantic in that regard. But he was once asked about this, and he said, yes, It is one of the greatest romantic poems ever written.
Wow.
So a very, very complex character. I think... So one of the reasons I feel an affinity to Powell is because when he was serious, he was deadly serious. And when he was having fun, he was having loads of fun. And I am that way. And that's why when I was reading about him, I just thought, wow, what a wonderful person. I wish I could have known him. Again, it kind of reminds me of Nigel. I mean, sometimes you can say things to Nigel and he'll go, stop that, we're being serious now. And then other times he'll have a pint on his head and dancing around. It's absolutely wonderful. But these are proper characters. These are proper people. Eccentricity is normality in a lot of ways. And the fact that you have Theresa May, who thinks that her most crazy thing she's ever done in her life is a run through a field of wheat. That sort of tells you about the people that run our nations nowadays. Now, luckily over here, Ed, you have an eccentric in office. But what do we have? We have a bland and tepid grey lady who is turning Brexit into a bland and tepid grey thing. I mean, this should be a celebratory moment. We didn't... It's funny, we might have muttered under our breaths when people left empire and declared independence, right? But what we didn't do is poo-poo their right to self-determination and their right for sort of the celebration of their own independence. We are poo-pooing our own right and our own independence at the moment with this whole Brexit process. The idea that we should be sorry somehow, the idea that we should be apologetic for wanting to be a normal self-governing nation. This is Theresa May. This is all her doing. And I think with that we should maybe start taking some questions and comments here. So the one thing about these questions and comments, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm not using that system that I once used on here. So I can't see loads of them. I can see 4 at a time. And I would prefer to do questions rather than comments, but I will read comments out and get Ed's feedback on some of this stuff too. We'll only do this for another 15 minutes. So get them in now if you want to get them in at all. Jeff Lowe says Jacob Rees-Mogg has sold himself down the river. Jacob Rees-Mogg recently tweeted out that he was a fan of his father's editorial in the Times on the April the 21st, 1968, tomorrow, on the back of Powell's speech, which called it an evil speech. And I think Mogg upset a lot of his potential base as a result of making that claim. Tracy Murray says, if Raheem can come from the United States, I'm sure we can all get up to Speaker's Corner on the 6th of May. I think you're probably right. I'm not flying back for anything, but I'm paying my own way. I think, look, I know. Train tickets, all that, expensive, but if you can find a good deal, if you can maybe drive down with some other people and split the petrol money on the way or mega bus or whatever it is, I think it's going to be well worth it. It's one of those moments where if we don't show up in massive numbers, the political establishment goes, ha ha ha, see, you guys aren't worth shit. And that should not happen. Because if we act like we aren't worth shit in a moment like that, then why do we expect to be treated like we are worth anything more? Miles Better asks, when does the book go on sale?
Well, Miles, it's already on sale.
The book is out now. It's called Enoch Was Right. You can just search Enoch Was Right in Amazon and you should be able to find it. There is another book which has a subtitle called that. It's not that one. It's called Enoch Was Right. It's grey. It's got a yellow font. It says by Raheem Kassam. It's cheap. It's cheap. Amazon tried to get me to price it at £20 for the paperback in the Amazon bookstore. I had none of it. It's $14.99. It's about as cheap as I could go. So I hope you will all consume it. And listen, please, because I do this all the time. Don't go, yeah, I'll get it at some point, because you won't. When you get off this stream, go onto Amazon, order your copy, and I'll tell you what, just to incentivize them a little bit more, Ed. Anyone that gets a copy and says they watched me on my live stream and got a copy off the live stream, I will sign their copies for them. Obviously, we'll have to find each other, or you can mail it to me and I'll post it back to you. And I'll even cover the shipping, but I will sign anyone that buys on the back of this live stream with a personal imprint as well. Terence Etchell says, when audio version and can you narrate it, please? What do you think? How long would that take?
Well, I used to work in publishing, and the amount of work that goes into making an audiobook is quite immense.
So I can't just read it?
I mean, you can. You need a studio. You need a professional recording studio and a sound engineer or two.
What are you doing tomorrow?
Yes. No, not happening.
George Appleton says, ordering tonight. Daniel Brooks says it's going to have a hardback version. No hardback, paperback and Kindle. If it was hardback, I think they charge another sort of, another £11 on cost price or something ridiculous. And I just thought, you know what, I'm not charging people 29 quid for a hardback copy of the book. So no hardback, paperback and Kindle. Go and get it. George Appleton says ordering tonight. Miles Better says shall buy it now. Fantastic. George Appleton says, where is the Macallan? It's in there. It's in there. That's actually Ed's Macallan that he brought me over. Eileen Marshall asks, where do we go from here to stop our nation being taken over by Islam?
Wow, that's quite a question. I think we need to begin with talking about people like Enoch Powell, honestly, and trying to finish the conversations that he started.
So here's the thing. Recently, the Muslim Council of Britain, which is this, sort of self-appointed group for Islam in the UK, and I don't say Muslims because I don't think they represent Muslims. I do think they represent Islam in the UK. Had a go at Leave.eu, one of the Leave groups, and they said, you're using graphics that are Islamophobic because you're saying that the reason the Labour Party is so anti-Semitic is because they're pandering to the Muslim vote. Now, firstly, that's absolutely true, right? That there is so much evidence to suggest that's true. It's not the only reason the left is anti-Semitic, by the way, but it is such a political calculation what the Labour Party is doing now for those pockets of Muslim votes around the country. Very, very evident. But the Muslim Council of Britain, Leave.eu came to me and they said, what do you know about these guys? And I said, well, give me a minute. And I drafted them a 2,000-word response. The MCB is an overtly anti-Semitic organisation. It has opposed Holocaust commemoration ceremonies in London, boycotted them. It has members of its organisation that have invited speakers to the United Kingdom and distributed flyers in the United Kingdom that have called for attacks on Ahmadiyya Muslims because they regard them as non-Muslim. They regard them as kafir. Kafar, or however you want to say it. I think if you're going to be honest about this and you're going to solve this problem, you have to tackle it at the source. The source of Islamic non-integration and rejectionism of British values at the moment is not your ordinary Muslim who couldn't give a crap about what's going on their televisions or what's in the newspapers. The problem is the groups that seek to represent them, that give the lines to the imams, who then pass the information down. Personally, I would have an immediate prescription on the Muslim Brotherhood and all of its affiliate groups in the United Kingdom. It is a terrorist organisation. And with that, you would find that groups like the Muslim Council of Britain, which, by the way, was founded by the Muslim Brotherhood, would not be able to freely operate and poison the minds of people who would otherwise be, look, I'm happy to get to a point where people are where Muslims in the United Kingdom are apathetic towards the United Kingdom. But at the moment, we're seeing a hostility, at least in some regards. And I just want to get to the point where there's apathy. So I hope that answers the question in some regard. It's not a very positive answer, but it's an answer nonetheless. Daniel Bond asks, do you think Gerard Batten can revive
Yeah, I think the only thing that can revive UKIP is a total failure of Brexit. No offense, UKIP, but no, I mean it was a party that came into existence on a single issue, and in theory, that single issue is no longer an issue.
I disagree with that. UKIP received its highest influx of members when it opposed the same-sex marriage bill. It wasn't perceived by the public to be a single-issue party.
Fair enough, but I think there were, at the time, and even going back, there were a lot of people like me who, when I lived in the UK, was a diehard member of the Tory party, despite what was going on with the Cameroons, and never even thought to make that jump to UKIP, because it was, what's the point? Everything that they stand for, at least I thought the Tories stood for, just a little less.
Well, and that's another conversation.
Yeah, I mean, now that's clearly not the case. If you want to talk about does Britain need an actual right-wing conservative party? Absolutely. I wish them the best of luck. They'll probably all end up in prison, the way things are going.
Well, Dave Tracy asks, would Powell be in prison if he was around now?
If he was German, certainly. If he was British, I think they would try. He would definitely have gotten a visit from a couple of
100%.
Transgendered police officers or whatever you have over there now. There's no way he could have, Ofcom would have gotten complaints for airing the speech if they had aired it anywhere. It would have been a mess. Everything that happened and then some.
Mark Kilroy asks, can you imagine if the Muslim population rose to 20%? We're currently at 5%. Your thoughts?
Visit London, mate.
It's
pretty much about 20%, right?
Oh God, I don't know whether I think I was laughing out of pure hysteria at that point. There's a study. I'm trying to find it right now. Pew Research, Muslim population, Britain. There was a study that was done recently. Here we are, Pew, November 2017. The Muslim population of Sweden could hit 30% by 2050 if current migratory patterns continue. The United Kingdom by 2050, 17.2%. So to go back to your question, to go back to the question that was asked of us just now, Ed, can you imagine a United Kingdom with a Muslim population of 20%? Well, it has been imagined, and it has been forecast as our future. And as we know, organisations like Pew tend to underestimate rather than overestimate. So maybe not 17% by 2050, but maybe 25% by 2050, and maybe that means 20% by 2040. That's in spitting distance. That's very, very soon indeed. And when you look at I'm just going to call it what it is, and the police can come and arrest me if they want. I'm sure the Met would love a junket to Washington. When you look at the whip hand that is currently being exercised, I mean, don't forget, I'm the Islamophobe of the year, 2014, I think it was. When you look at the whip hand that's being exercised, not just over native Britons, not just over white people, over black people, over non-Muslims, over former Muslims, over Jewish people. When you look at the way the Muslim community is consistently positioning itself and consistently expecting others to acclimatise towards its demands, and I say Muslim community, really what I'm talking about again is the grass tops, right, who set policy and who want to change Britain inexorably. That bodes very ill. We had Lutfur Rahman in East London. We've had Sadiq Khan now in London. We've had Saeeda Varsi. We've had Naz Shah. We've had, but can anybody point to a good Muslim politician in the United Kingdom? Just a question. Can anybody point to somebody who professes to be a practicing Muslim who has put the country before their faith? Because all those names that I just said, they don't. In fact, they reject that. Lord, what's his name? Nazir Ahmed actually once went on, I think, Pakistani television and bragged, and thank you to whoever sent this to me yesterday on Twitter, bragged about representing Muslims and Pakistanis ahead of British people in the House of Lords. This is a member of the House of Lords bragging on Pakistani television. Somebody's going to correct me and go, fake news, it was Bangladeshi television. Whatever. Bragged about putting something before Britain. And I just want to know, I mean, I can think of maybe one or two, Sajid Javid maybe, but then again, even Sajid Javid.
Does he practice?
I don't think he practices, but he pretends he practices. But even he, I mean, I caught him in a lie a couple of weeks ago saying that he got one of these Punish a Muslim Day letters, and it turned out that he had just copied and pasted somebody else's picture on Twitter and tweeted it with fan mail. And I asked him to provide the original, and he never would. I suspect he never got one, just wanted to be part of the victimhood pack. Saeed Kamal, again, not a particularly good politician. You know, I just think, you know, if to quote your president, Ed, they're not sending their best. Let's see, what else have we got here? John J.J. Hewitt says, tuning in. John J.J. Hewitt, you should have been tuning in for the last hour and a half. Hour and 15 minutes. We're about to wrap up. Well, we'll wrap up in the next sort of... Let's say we'll be done by 10:30, latest. You can stay in, you can drop out, but if I can ask you, just make sure you buy the book. If you're not a patron yet, become a patron. If you really can't afford the book, if you really can't, at least share it on your Facebook page, tweet about it, tell your friends, maybe ask somebody for a birthday present or a Christmas present. Is it Christmas yet? Not yet. It's bloody cold here. It feels like it's
I know.
It was like 8 degrees Celsius this morning here. Apparently it's getting warmer overnight. But I hear it's nice weather in the United Kingdom, so that's good. Kieran O'Neill asks, will Sadiq Khan ever be voted out, or is London doomed for all eternity? Will there be another Muslim mayor if he is ousted? Wow.
I think even if he is ousted, London is still doomed for all eternity. That's another question entirely. But you like London, don't you? You're one of those odd sorts.
I really don't like London. Where did you get this idea from?
I wasn't sure. I thought you did for some reason.
No. Look, I'm a Londoner.
Yeah.
Even though really I was raised in Uxbridge, so you know, I really I'm a Middlesex boy.
It's a dreadful city.
But you know, I don't like London. But I think what Sadiq has probably done, and most people won't say it out loud, they won't say it to pollsters, what Sadiq has probably done is rendered it impossible for there to be another Muslim mayor in the next couple of generations, well, the next generation. I think people are looking at this now and seeing the homicide rates, they're seeing the crime rates, they're seeing the flippancy with which he's doing his job, they're seeing him, you know, dry humping Justin Trudeau, and they're just saying, well, you know, what does this say? What does this say?
Well, here's a question, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Is that because he's a Muslim or because he's a kind of London globalist leftist?
I think there's a combination of several factors. I think firstly, I said on an interview with Frank Gaffney for the Centre for Security Policy this morning, I did a radio interview for them, and I said, I genuinely think Sadiq Khan likes what he's doing to London. I think there is an avowed British hatred deep within him that stems from his leftism in part, but also stems from his look, I mean, I'm going to say radical Islam, but certainly fundamentalist. I mean, he represented Louis Farrakhan, don't forget, the Nation of Islam. He was friends with one of the guys that was in Guantanamo, I believe, for terrorism. I mean, this man does not have the sort of left liberal values that, you know, the Labour Party pretend, like Emily Thornberrys of the world pretend to espouse. There's a really interesting question. All right, Mark Smith asks, how many books have you now got published for him? 2. The really interesting question, however, was from somebody else, and the question has disappeared off my page, so I'm sorry I can't name you, Mr. Questioner, but they asked, Powell-backed voluntary repatriation, do you, Raheem? Well, the answer to your question is, I think, threefold. Number one, yes. I think it. You know, why wouldn't you help? Well, look. Think about how much money we give away in foreign aid every year, right? If a person wants to go back to their country of origin or the country of their parents' origin, and they want to start a business or they want to, you know, whatever it is, why wouldn't we help them do that? I mean, we pay free money to keep people in the United Kingdom, to do nothing, why wouldn't you give money to people to do something rather than handing out wads of cash to dictators or government bureaucracies or whatever it is that we give our 12 billion plus pounds a year in foreign aid for? So number one on that point, on the fiscal point and on the foreign aid point, yes. Number two, people don't realise this. The United Kingdom currently still has voluntary repatriation. It's called assisted repatriation now. It's only for illegal immigrants, but they can apply for up to £2,000 worth of funding to start a business or whatever it is they want to do in the country of their origins. And I think the way I look at this is, people go, oh yeah, but that's illegal, so that's different from people who have come illegally. Well, why are you giving the upper hand? Why are you giving preferential treatment
Should definitely be the other way around.
to somebody who broke the law?
Yeah.
All right, fine. You come here illegally, you come to the United Kingdom illegally, and you get some cash, and you go home. You come legally and you want to go home, no cash. We don't want to know about you. Forget about it. What are you talking about? Where is the moral impetus in that standpoint? So for that reason, also I am a yes. And then on the third point, there are people, and Powell noticed the difference between immigrants and immigrants, right? There are some people who move to countries, like me, right now, in the United States, right? I am not an immigrant to the United States. I am a visitor in the United States. I've not moved here for the rest of my life. I am working here, I have moved here, and I know I will go back at some point. I am not an immigrant. There are people who move to the United Kingdom for short periods of time. They want to do a job, they want to learn a language, they want to get some skills, they want to get a diploma, whatever it is, and then they want to go home. But yet we include them in our immigration statistics. We include them in our immigration figures, and we treat them like immigrants in the sense that we don't expect them to ever return, even though they might want to return. After Powell's speech, the BBC Panorama polled people, and I think 74% of people agreed with what Powell had to say in the round. But then they asked a question about voluntary repatriation, and there were so many. And again, I'm using terminology from back then. Coloured immigrants. I believe there was 92% of coloured immigrants that said that they were either for or could be convinced of the policy of voluntary repatriation. I think there were 38% who were avowedly for it. The rest of them said, yeah, well, we don't really know, not sure. And there was only, I think, 8% who said, no, Britain is my home.
Do you think you'd find similar numbers amongst the Muslim community?
Gosh, that's a very interesting question. I wish somebody would do that polling.
Yeah. Personally, I would expect to see somewhat similar numbers.
Yeah, I think that's right.
If you come from, whether it's Pakistan or Jamaica, and you end up on this tiny, rainy, cold island in Northern Europe, and it's not warm like where you come from, and the food is all bland compared to where you came from, you're going to get pretty miserable pretty fast. I know I would. But that's just me.
All right, let's keep going. Somebody says, "What are you drinking?" Well, we're being dilettantes right now. We're only drinking Johnny Walker Black, but I don't have that much to spend on posh whiskey, so that's what I fill my decanter with. It's also just a nice everyday whiskey. It's a nice easy. You don't have to worry about spending hundreds of pounds on it. You don't have to worry when you refill it, any of that. So Johnny Walker Black, and one of the reasons why it's my go-to is because it was also one of my heroes' go-tos. You know who that was?
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens.
Really?
It was his favourite.
Was Johnny Walker Black?
It was his favourite.
Could he not afford blue?
Of course he could. Of course he could. Philip Rudd says, a blend, blasphemy. Fine. Mark Kilroy asks, how do you think the UK take to For Britain? How do you think the UK takes to For Britain if Anne-Marie Waters gets a seat? Well, look, I wish Anne-Marie the best. I've said this multiple times on my streams. I don't think they're quite doing enough. It was great they got an endorsement from Morrissey this week. Did you see that? Look, I agree with almost everything they say. So, you know, all power to them. I just don't think I see them doing enough in terms of campaign messaging, electoral politics, you know, all that sort of thing to reach outside their natural sphere, their natural bubble, which is effectively this audience, you guys watching right now. Let's see. Jason Alsop says that's not whiskey. Rahul Kumar asks, which immigration groups do you think are examples of successful integration? I think we covered that. I mean, there's probably more than one. I think Indians are particularly good at it. I think
you could further divide the Indian subcontinent.
Absolutely. I
but
mean, I think the Sikhs have taken like ducks to water in the United Kingdom. That was one of the things I think Enoch was wrong about. Actually, he pointed to the turban as being a means by which you would force lack of integration. I don't think it made that big of a difference in the end. I'm not sure he particularly picked the turban, but I think he said that Sikh communities had a tendency to not want to integrate or demand their own sort of set of demands of public bodies, public organisations. As one of the things I think he got wrong, and I was surprised that he got that wrong given his Indiaphilia. But then again, he did refer to himself as a Hindu and not a Sikh. Yeah,
that his distaste for the Sikhs could have been part of his.
It was probably part of his Hindu affinity. George Appleton says, should I move back to Glasgow from Toronto? Well, firstly, George, I mean you got to leave Toronto. Although I've had a lot of fun in Toronto in my life, it's I hear it's not going so well. I'd love to come to Toronto again. I've got family in Toronto actually. I spent a long night once at a martini bar called Hey Lucy's. They were doing $3 martinis.
Good Lord.
Yeah, we had a good time. I'll tell you the story one day. I can't tell it in for public consumption.
Go back to Glasgow. Scotland's awesome.
Scotland is awesome. I'm not sure I think Glasgow is awesome.
It's better than Toronto.
You're probably right. But it's more dangerous than Toronto.
Possibly.
I'm in Edinburgh, man.
I lived in Edinburgh for 5 years.
Exactly.
So,
Bill Appleton says he quite likes Toronto. Shirley Bradford Griffith says, hubby is enjoying your book, Raheem. Shirley, which book? No-Go Zones or Enoch Was Right? Now you have to be specific. We're going to wrap up in about 6 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, so if you've got anything more to say, let us have it. There is a slight delay on our screens from when you type things in, so...
if you're waiting on another question, I have a quick one for you.
Oh God, yeah, go on.
Well, given you pointed out the audience for this kind of stuff is probably all watching.
Yeah.
Anyway, how do we win the battle to reclaim Enoch's legacy? How do we get to a point where we can have the conversation he was trying to have without being called a racist or a bigot? Or is it just not possible?
Oh, I think it's completely possible. I think most ordinary people still have open minds to this stuff, and I think actually their natural predication is towards the things that we're talking about. They see it in their communities, they see it in their schools and their hospitals, everything. They get it. They're just scared. I understand. I mean, if the average person went through what people like me have subjected ourselves to intentionally for all their lives, I mean, I've no doubt this is why a lot of people don't leave Islam as well, because they just cannot deal with the stress of it all, and it's fine. I understand that. It takes a certain kind of masochist to want to put themselves through this. I think it's perfectly possible, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great question. I think firstly you have to get informed. I mean, hyper-informed. Like the Americans are, actually. The American conservative base is hyper-informed. Whenever you go out...
Base.
Yeah, not the grass tops, the grass roots. When you go out, and I have, to Wichita, Kansas, or to Detroit, even in California, the conservative base, they know numbers, they know statistics, they know historical moments, they know dates, they know presidents at different points in their presidencies, they know who the foreign ministers were, all of this stuff. It has been passed down to them that their nation is their birthright, and it is only their fault if they give that up. And we've sort of, in the United Kingdom, I feel like we've kind of, because we do have this idea of deference, right? But who are we deferring to now? Now, instead of the Privy Council and the monarchy, who once had the greatest interests of the nation at heart, we now defer to the political classes. We now defer to the Sundar Katwalas and the Owen Joneses and even the good ones, even the Julia Hartley Brewers and whatever it is.
And immigrants.
And we give all the ground up, and we think, oh well. I know a lot of people don't, because of the way that the economy now works, is that both parents have to go out and work jobs and all this stuff. We just don't have time. But you have to find time. You have to turn off Jersey Shore, Geordie Shore. You have to turn off the X Factor. I'm deadly serious. I have the same problem, as a lot of you will know. I get distracted by my Xbox. But you have to set yourself a cutoff point and say, right, at 9 o'clock I'm turning off the television. I'm going to read. So that when I do go down the pub, or I do find myself in an awkward political discussion with someone, I've got the upper hand. Not just the upper hand to beat them. Forget about beating them. Think about converting them. Think about bringing them onto your side. And when you win that discussion, don't gloat about it. Don't be boastful. Don't be braggadocious. When you kindly win a discussion with somebody, and you sit back and you don't shout in their face, let them do the shouting. When you sit back and you walk them through all the issues, all the points. Let's say you read this book about Enoch, and you walk them through all the points about Enoch Powell, and they go, oh, actually, yeah, I guess it wasn't so bad after all. Then you go, well, now I want you to read that book, and I want you to talk to other people about him as well. And I think, look, this isn't a solution that we're going to see in our lifetimes, but it's at least a solution that we can pass on to our children or our grandchildren. That is the best we can do right now. The people in this room, on this live stream, and the people in this literal room, being you, I'm never going to be Prime Minister. You're never going to be President. But we can at least provide the platform and the consistent messaging and the challenging of the status quo, whereby our children or our children's children can get there. And I think that's the best we can do. Aaron Harris says, have you heard something called the Kalergi Plan? Yes, we all know about the Kalergi Plan. The Kalergi Plan, the Kalergi Plan. The Barcelona Declaration, the Kalergi Plan.
Well, he was a very interesting man, and a lot of people on the alt-right really misunderstand where he was coming from.
I think we should have to save that for another time.
We could, but, all of those characters really, and in a way, you can link him into Powell. It's very hard for people today in our 21st century soundbite, let's distill politics to their most absurd level possible for the masses. A lot of people just can't understand Enoch Powell. And
don't get me wrong.
It's very similar in that sense.
At the very beginning of reading Enoch, I could barely understand Enoch Powell.
Modern political paradigms, which are basic in the extreme, do not do a good job of explaining pretty much anyone who was into politics and educated until about 1950, because nuance was a thing back in the day, and now it just doesn't exist anymore.
So. No, I agree, because we're all trying to get our news from Instagram. Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to leave it there. By the way, I didn't address the Kalergi Plan question, because look, let me put it this way. I say this so much, and often I mutter it under my breath, because I don't like to be rude to people. Forget about it. Forget about the stuff, the conspiratorial stuff that you think is going to keep you under the thumb. Think about how you're going to get out from under the thumb. Stop obsessing about how you got there necessarily, and start thinking about how you're going to get out of there. What your message is, how you're going to convert people, what you're going to say to them about immigration, about no-go zones, about Enoch Powell. There are people like me out there doing the hard legwork for you, so you've got it in a format that you can read, digest, and talk to people about. That's your job. Your job is not to worry about what happened in the late 1800s and how this was all some big conspiracy to keep you, a serf. Fine, we know that, we accept that, right? We get what's been happening. There's no point obsessing about it. What we have to obsess about is victory. We have to obsess about winning. We're going to leave it there. Edmund Kozak, thank you very much. You've done a very wonderful job.
Thank you for having me.
At interviewing me. I've done a very wonderful job at being interviewed. Ladies and gentlemen, again, look, I really mean it. Get the book, buy the book, read it, let me know what you think. I'll sign you copies for anybody that tells me they bought it off the back of this live stream. More importantly, if you have the ability, $1, $2, $5, $10, $20. One guy recently started giving $100 a month to the Patreon account, Patreon, patreon.com/Raheem Kassam. All of the money, every single penny of it, I plow into resources, books that I use to put out things like this, subscriptions that we need to get into archives and pull video and all of the things that you consume on my page and Breitbart London and all around the place. It all happens. None of it ever happened before you, by the way. It all happens because of you. So if you can do it, do it. And on the back of saying do, goodbye. Thanks, guys. Make sure you're there on May the 6th. Thanks, Ed. Say bye.
Bye.